What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Always Hope Podcast, a production of Willwood's Faith and Marriage. This is Dr. Mario Sacasa, and I pray that you're having an amazing day today. All right, gentlemen, single guys, here you go. Here's your episode. I welcome to the show Chad Etzel, leadership coach and host of the Catholic Single and Flourishing Podcast, to talk through what single men need to know about dating. Lots of challenging topics out there, and we're going to dive into all of them today. In today's episode, we discuss the limiting beliefs that men often have pertaining to dating, unhelpful cultural messages about men, looking at dating and talking to women as skills that can be developed, the pressures of being one of the few guys at young adult events, the differences in dating from high school to college to young adult, defining dating success, how to know when a girl's interested, how to ask her out, and what to talk about on the first date. Like I said, we are covering it all today. So ladies, if you're listening to this episode, please chime into the discussion and let us know if any of these approaches are helpful. All right, if you find this show helpful, please share with one other person who you think would benefit from it. Well, God bless everybody. Let's get into this conversation with Chad Etzel. Chad Etzel, welcome to the Always Hope Podcast. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing absolutely great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh man, it's my pleasure. Sincerely, I'm really excited about this conversation. I'm really viewing this as we've talked about already as kind of like a counter to an episode I did a few weeks ago with Maria Spears and Megan Elfelt, where we talked about what single women need to know about dating. And immediately, as soon as I finished that episode, I was like, Lord, I want to do like a guy's version of this and what single men need to know. And then God provides. You reached out to me, and I think maybe even partially because of that episode or your connections with them, to be able to say, hey, let's kind of have this conversation and let's talk about what guys need to do, what guys need to know. And so I know you offer leadership coaching as well as the host of your own podcast, Catholic Single and Flourishing. And so just tell me a little bit about what got you into this and why you're viewing this as a ministry worthwhile tackling.
Well, what it started with was I had been in ministry for a number of years, having done Culture Project and Focus, and started initially with the idea in mind of fundraising. All right, we just naturally, as part of the work, you fundraise your own ministry budget, which includes your salary. And I started coaching people in that, and then realized that there was this whole industry of coaches out there, anything from personal life coaching to personal finance coaching to small business coaching and leadership coaching. And I realized, okay, this is a great industry to get into. I really love coaching. I actually have a sports coaching background. Okay. And so I looked into this as a profession, developed that career track, and still apply it into the fundraising area of mission. But also, in addition to that, started doing more, there's a lot more depth than just the numbers, but also diving into people's limiting beliefs and helping them move forward on some of those inner blocks. And then I realized, I'm single, and I am single at this time of recording. There's certain blocks that we have when it comes to relationships, when it comes to dating. So how about I apply these leadership principles into that sphere? So it's not just, hey, I do leadership and management coaching, which I do for Focus right now, but also how can I apply this to my life and then also those around me in Catholic singles coaching?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So just what are places that you've seen that connection between the kind of skills that you're encouraging your clients, I guess, to acquire when it comes to leadership, and how are you translating some of that leadership language and skill development into this arena with dating?
Well, when I work with managers, a lot of times there's conflict with people. So what we do is we talk about what are the conflicts specifically, but also what are the stories behind those conflicts. And it could be they have some sort of bad past experience with that person or with a similar situation outside of that particular individual that's coming up in the moment. What we do in management coaching is we help them to think about the story that they're telling themselves and how that's creating that internal hesitation or that tension or that resistance, because the story really can cause those sorts of emotions to come up and prevent us from taking the action and moving forward. What I realize is, hey, this can be applied to our single life, which we're going to be diving into today, especially as it relates to dating and being intentional in dating. The it could be a story that we're telling ourselves about approaching the other sex, and how do we relate to them, or it could be rooted in a past experience of, well, this last time I asked this woman out, this happened, and now I'm generalizing that. So that's how I see where there's a lot of that crossover that can happen and can be helpful in working with singles in overcoming those stories, overcoming those limiting beliefs, and helping to give us new empowering actions forward.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to be talking specifically about guys. And so what are some limiting beliefs that you hear that men are struggling with? I mean, you spoke about some of those patterns already, but what are just some that you're hearing guys kind of saying?
I think most commonly is this goes for both men and women. And I've heard it in interviews that I've done and one-on-one conversations, coaching conversations that I've had. And a lot of it comes down to, am I worthy, or am I good enough? It often is in the form of, is there something wrong with me? Which I actually did an episode of my podcast for Catholic Single and Flourishing on, is there something wrong with me? So a lot of that has to, there's a lot of times maybe some past history with relationships, dating relationships that didn't work, or situations where we as men have asked women out and we continue to be stuck, whether it's a no, getting rejected outright, or just a couple of dates and not moving forward. So is there something wrong with me tends to be a question, a fundamental question or limiting belief that we ask ourselves. I think that there's other things too, where maybe it's, oh, I don't think I'm ready for dating right now. I've heard that sometimes. I need to just work on myself right now. And that could be anything that's financial. Like it's more, I need to get my personal finances in order, or I need to overcome this compulsion to using pornography. And sometimes we just, that goes to the other limiting belief earlier of, I'm just not worthy, but it might be more situational specific. So those are the ones that commonly come up in coaching or conversations that I have with people.
Yeah. Now there is a place, of course, for people to feel at a point where they have enough in order to feel ready to continue to move forward with dating. But I agree in the sense that if it's too much, then it becomes this limiting belief where if you're trying to get yourself perfect before you actually get out the door, that's never going to happen. And so there is a little bit of a balance that's there. But it's great to know certainly that, for men, again, I know we could talk about both, but I want to focus more just, on guys, that we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And specifically when it comes to kind of cultural messages now, I mean, it seems like we live in this age where, man, we just don't know what to do with guys anymore. I mean, it's like there's just it's like just this dichotomy, if it's like, well, man's got to be everything, or he's got to be just a superhero, or he's got to be able to be emotional enough, or he's got to be just passive. And I know in your podcast, I think it was in your podcast, or maybe it was afterwards, we were joking a little bit about the Barbie movie, and I haven't seen it, but I know that, like, basically the premise of the movie is like Ken is just an accessory and he's nothing more than just that, and it's like, wow, that's where we're at, that we just think that this is what men are. And so as guys, I'm very sensitive to messages that movies convey about masculinity, because I have 4 boys. And so when we watch movies, we always are processing and talking about it. So I'm very sensitive about, like, okay, how are men being portrayed, and what are good models? What are things that we should be pursuing? What are things that we shouldn't? But all of these cultural messages, again, even if we wall ourselves off in our own Catholic bubble, we're all swimming in these waters. You know what I mean? Like we're not immune to these messages that are there. How do you think that some of these conflicting cultural messages about how men are supposed to behave, or they're just toxic, or their masculinity isn't valued, whatever it might be, how do you think that impacts some of those other limiting beliefs that you spoke about earlier? How do you think that impacts guys and their capacity to feel confident to move forward with dating?
It seems, at least in my impression, that it impacts us men in a number of different ways, where there's like the movie star that, hey, you got to be like this guy, Ryan Gosling, which is ironic. I mean, him being in the Barbie movie, but also he's in other movies where The Notebook, I know growing up with that movie, it was, you have to be this perfect romancer type. And there's that where I think that plays into a lot of these questions that men wonder about. Am I worthy enough? Is there something wrong with me? Because we're comparing ourselves to the movie star standard, which of course in movies, you can write a character in any way that you want.
Right.
And you can rehearse a script of this is how you talk. So I think there's that side of things where it's this idealized movie star. And then there's the other side of things where, just a simple example, Homer Simpson of this, and I think this Ryan Gosling in the Barbie movie is portrayed in this similar way, whereas this kind of bumbling, stumbling fool, and these are funny characters. Homer Simpson's a funny character, but this is what masculinity is portrayed as. And then I'd even go another step further, and you see this with a number of ways that men are portrayed in culture today about patriarchy, and all men are doing is controlling the world, and that causes harm to women. And I mean, there's definitely something a whole conversation to be talked about and unpacked there. But you have these different versions of, I would say, false masculinity. And then the cultural discussion gets talked about how that is what masculinity is this toxic masculinity. So masculinity has to be completely undermined. And there is a lack of talk on authentic masculinity. That I think is something that needs to be talked about more, of what that actually looks like. And I think just in the context, if I'm going to summarize this, is in the cross, Jesus giving his life up for our sins, saying, this is my body given up for you. That is an image of self-sacrifice. It's going to look different in different situations, but it's not the idiot. It's not the one who takes everything for himself, but it's somebody who lays down his life for the sake of others. Yeah.
I think the image of masculinity that I've seen the most is actually like the image of the beta male, and the young guy who's a little unsure of himself, doesn't quite know what to do. It doesn't know what it means to kind of initiate, doesn't really know what to do with their kind of powers or prowess, and that symbol, that image of the man, I've seen repeatedly, throughout lots of movies. And I think that's the one that maybe sticks the most, because I feel like that's where most guys kind of land. It's like they don't know what it means to go up. So in the context of dating, that's what we're going to be talking about. They don't necessarily have the skill set to go up and to talk to a girl. They don't know how to be able to initiate conversation. And so they feel a lack of competence in that area. And maybe they just struggle making relationships, as a whole, or the whole bit, right? And so there, and then it can bleed into lots of other things you're talking about earlier, about like making sure you have your finances in order, you have this thing in order, whatever it is. And so make sure that you got all that before you can feel like you're capable of moving forward. But I think that's the script that I really kind of want us to kind of overlook and recognize that, there is a way forward here. And that really, when it comes to dating, okay, so we could talk about this in terms of how to be comfortable being single, but then also how to begin conversations, and then what dates, should look like. We'll talk about this all. But that there's certain skills here that can be learned. And I think that's what I want guys to know who are listening to this episode, is that if you're struggling in being able to have conversations, if you're struggling in being able to overcome these limiting beliefs, I'm sure this is what you tell your clients also, is that some of this is just basic skills that you just haven't learned, and that's okay. But we're going to work on acquiring these skills so that you can get the confidence that you need. Confidence isn't something, you can just be a confident person in like by genetics, but usually confidence is something that's domain specific. Very few of us feel confident in every single situation that we step into. But where the areas that we feel the most confident in are areas where we have some competence, some possession of skill in that area. And I want us to look at this arena kind of in that same light. Now, when it comes to kind of dating, I guess in the Catholic sense specifically, this is my observation. I'm married, and I've been married for 20 years, and I'm kind of just by no fault of my own, by no doing of my own, God just was able to meet my wife in college, and that's just how that went. I'm grateful for that. But I've done a lot of work in this area of dating, and because of Dating Well and being a podcast and speaking at college campuses and speaking at young adult ministries and the like, as somebody who's not in the dating pool, I look and I see a lot more women than I see men. And I know kind of in general in Christianity or in Catholicism, there's more women that are practicing than men. But it seems like even in young adult or in single circles, there's the numbers are even higher in terms of the number of guys versus the number of women in that ratio. Does that work to the advantage of a guy because he feels like, hey, I have more potential here? Or does that work against him because he is, there's more pressure or something of that nature? So how did the dynamics, I mean, in my observations, right or wrong, what do you see in that in terms of the ratio between men to women? Does that work in a guy's favor who's single, or does that kind of work against him in some way?
That's a interesting question. I think on a sociological level, it'd be interesting to do a study, at least in terms of
Sure.
Catholics or Catholic Christians and that sort of world. In my mind, intuitively, it would make sense that it works better for men, because if you pair everybody off,
right,
then there'd still be more women than men, and all the men would be taken. So I think on an intuitive level that makes sense, but it's just isn't the case where you just have more women and then men are all paired off. That it's not as simple as that. I think that there's something to that where you mentioned the pressure. It can be hey, look at all these women who are here in this city or in this organization versus the men. And that tends to happen with ministry. There's a lot more women involved, and you can, look at you have you can pick anyone that you want, which isn't necessarily the experience, because what happens is we see things from filters, I suppose. As men, we're thinking, okay, who do I want to ask out? And just because I ask her out doesn't mean she's going to say yes. So there's a filter that she goes through of, is this the type of guy that I'm looking for? So it's not an automatic. I would imagine that there's advantages and disadvantages being on both sides. And it's a matter of figuring out, how do I really strategize? How do I figure out what are the limiting factors for me, but not let those be the determining factors that hold me back and keep me single?
Yeah. So what are some? Just keep going. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say, this is one of those where I think for women it might be, all right, there's less men and more women who are involved in the church, but that's not the determining factor. I think for men, similarly, it might be something of, this is a limiting factor of, I keep getting rejected, or I'm not. Yeah, I'm just trying to think that, or where I live, I guess, is maybe has a higher ratio of men. Well, that's not a determining factor in whether you find a spouse.
So what would be a determining factor then?
The determining factor is how we choose to go about our lives. So in a sense, I remember there was a book that talked about this, where we participate in our external circumstances, but our external circumstances don't dictate our lives. What was meant by that is, if we live in a small town in Nebraska or wherever, okay, well, we have that external circumstance, but it's how we respond to that circumstance that allows us to move forward. And that's our choices. Those are the determining factors. So for instance, it's, do I choose to move? Do I want to move to a different city? Or do I want to be more open to dating in a long distance setting? How do I find those opportunities to meet people? It's our choices then that become more of the determining factor there. Of course, according to the will of God and through prayer.
Right. Yeah. The serenity prayer, right? Lord, give me the capacity to accept the things I can't, to have courage to do the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's a paraphrase, of course. That's not exactly how it goes, but it's that sense that if we focus on the areas that we have no control over, we're just going to fall into cynicism and despondency. But if we focus on the areas that we do have some sense of agency on, that's what keeps us moving forward, and that's what allows us to evade trauma. Honestly, that's what helps us to evade disassociation. That's what helps us to kind of acknowledge that we have to move forward. And so when it comes to dating, then, it could be that you're in a situation where there's lots of single women and you're the guy, and, everybody else is like, oh man, look at all these girls, or this is ripe opportunity for you, man, just kind of ask them out or whatever. And you could be like, well, I kind of know them all because I've seen them all in ministry settings or whatever. And I'm like, I just don't really feel any movement to ask any of them out specifically, even though I'm keenly aware that maybe 3 or 4 of them are very much interested in me and would like for me to move in that direction, but I'm just not reciprocating that. So, okay, if that's the situation, then acknowledge that. And then that says, all right, what are other options for you? Trying long distance dating, being set up, going to a different town, doing different things of this nature, which allows you to be able to open up the pool and the prospects that are there. So it can be hard for people to be able to see the difference between what do I actually have control over and what do I not? What are the factors that are definitely preventing me from engaging in a dating experience? And then what are the factors that I can have control over and can change? Now, something that we've talked about here, so shifting gears here for a second, dating looks different at different stages. And it's important for us to kind of make these distinctions. All right. So what is the intention, I guess, or how does dating look differently from like a teenager to college student to maybe a young professional? We can kind of look in those groups there. What do you think are some of the differences and distinctions that need to be made for dating across kind of those different spans?
Sure. This is something, and I'm going to start this question off, or answering this question, just by establishing something I'll probably come back to as we go throughout the show. But every person's situation is different. There are some trends, there are some patterns, but every situation is different because we all have different paths, and we're bringing into potential relationships and in these different experiences. But I think what I commonly see, just having been around ministry for as long as I have, that with high schoolers, a lot of what is focused on in high school, or maybe should be focused on in high school, is really friendship and what is friendship and developing friendships. That I think is very fundamental for how we interact as human beings. I know from my own experience, I think back to when I was a kid in high school, it was just through common interests that we would get together. We'd eat pizza and play video games and watch Star Wars and so on. And that was what friendship was. But in reality, there's a deeper level of building friendship around virtue and growing together and growing as men. And in the case of my friendships growing up, that was never really talked about. So that I think is really maybe a point of emphasis that we can grow in. I know the Catholic world has done a pretty good job on the message of chastity and the importance of growing in chastity. And I think that that's a place that we can really continue to emphasize on what that means, more so than abstinence, which is saving sex for marriage. Chastity is the virtue that enables you to be able to see somebody and as a person, and then love. And that's a ongoing thing of being able to grow in that virtue that you have to build from a young age. I think when it comes to dating, it's simply just going back to those fundamentals of the virtue of chastity and building good friendships. Because going on a date, a high schooler who's going on a date, just simply learning how to be courteous, how to pick somebody up from their home, go to a restaurant, have a conversation, and be able to drop them off. Just very, very fundamental at that level. I think by the time you get to college, you still build on that. And there's similar things there, but there may be more opportunities for intentional community where, so for instance, most colleges have either a Newman Center or some sort of Catholic student center. And there's an opportunity that really you don't have as much in high school, where it's so easily accessible. Right. Again, I think you can develop further in friendships in those ways and get to know people there. And that's something that kind of disappears as you get into the young adult life. You don't have that same place where you hang out, and you have you might see people once a month or even less if it's just, hey, here's this young adult event and I'm going to show up, and who knows who's going to show up to this thing. So I think that within each of these, it's just it's a different situation. So the dating scene will change. I think college students, you're probably in a place where you can potentially be discerning marriage more seriously than you would in a high school setting. There in certainly some exceptions there, but there's a lot of a lot more support at the college level, especially if you're in a Catholic environment. But moving into the young adult stage, it's you see people less frequently. And so the how to approach dating changes when you're a young adult as opposed to college.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's just a lot harder to meet people and to build those relationships. Like college is great because if you go to a school that has a great campus ministry, or that it's just, man, it's like, this is the hangout spot. This is what we do, regularly. And you miss that when you graduate. It's like, you're used to going to mass and just seeing like 15 people and being like, hey, what are we doing tonight? Let's just make this happen. And what a great opportunity, a great season of life to have that level of freedom and spontaneity. You become a young adult, you start working in your job. You might be the youngest person in that office by 15 years, or you might be the only Catholic anywhere, And so it's like, all right, well, what are we going to do? So it does take on just even meeting people and friendships and building friendships is challenging, let alone then you get into dating. And in dating well, I established, kind of 5 stages of a relationship and friendship, and then kind of, casual dating, and then getting into kind of, steady relationships. And maybe that casual dating isn't the right term. And I'm willing to massage that a little bit, but I think I'm not saying, of course, casual hooking up or casual sex. That's not at all what I'm saying, but I'm giving space for not looking at every first date with the pressure that this is going to be the one. And I think this is one of the challenges that we experience, certainly in the college or even in the young adult setting, where we need to recognize that sometimes dating is just an opportunity to meet people. And I mean, the type of people that we want to meet are certainly going to be people that we hope have good character, and that could be potential, spouses, but that we can't go into every single first date with this pressure that this thing has to work out. And I think that's a way of kind of massaging that and kind of breaking some of that. What do you think about some of those pressures and expectations, specifically for young adults, that may be placing too much on themselves?
I would agree wholeheartedly with the point that you're coming from, because this whole, and especially that, just addressing that whole casual dating concept. I think you mentioned it's not casual hooking up, casual sex, or that's not what we're talking about here. But I think maybe people take issue with this, and you can share what you have seen with people and their objections. But this whole idea of casual means purposeless.
Correct.
Maybe that may be where people are coming from. And
just throwing spaghetti against the wall. You're just going to ask every girl out in the ministry. We know who he is. He doesn't really care. He's not really serious. Blah blah. And I'm not speaking about that either. And that's not what I'm saying either. Keep going. To interrupt you.
So what I would say in this is, it's good that we laid out kind of the different stages of where people are coming from: high school, college, young adult, because it's the way we approach dating is going to have to be different. Because if you go to a Newman Center where there's 20, 30 people in college and you're interacting with them, you have the space to be able to get to know people in a way, and you essentially are replacing the first dates that you would experience in young adult years.
Right.
In where you just don't have that luxury as a young adult. So that's where maybe the casual dates, you kind of accelerate through that. You don't fully replace those maybe at the college level, but you get an idea of, hey, guy likes girl, and they talk and they've gotten to know each other over 3 or 4 months. And then he finally asks her out on a date.
Yeah, because they're in the same groups, and they always kind of, at game night, they end up sitting next to each other on the couch and they're chatting. Those end up being kind of those, I'm going to think of another word if casual really bothers people, but give me a thesaurus. Where's my synonyms? Come on, Chad, help me out here. But but I agree with you. Informal. And I don't like that either, but I'm with you. Keep going.
Yes. Right. And then, getting into the young adult setting, I've had this conversation for 10 minutes with this woman, and I think she's interesting. I think she's cute, but I'm also like, I can't ask her to marry me right now. And I think that's where a lot of the conferences for college talks and so on, they're coming from a standpoint of they're thinking about the Newman Center example. And okay, if you're at a Newman Center, you get to know somebody, ask her out on a date and make sure you're clear and say the word date. Whereas
Yes.
if I do that as a young adult and I ask somebody out after a 10-minute conversation, the word date is so loaded that
Right.
sometimes it makes her panic.
Right.
So there's a little bit more just based on where you're coming from and how well you know the person.
Hmm.
You need to be a little bit more casual, informal in a sense. So I hope this is making sense here. But it's just those two different contexts of based on the rapport, based on how well you know a person, is going to impact how you approach getting to know somebody.
Yeah. Well, this is where the chastity piece comes in. I mean, if we establish chastity as a baseline here, that's a given, okay? Then there's a place where I understand the reaction against this is to say, well, it's just casual, it's just hooking up. That's not at all what we're saying. But if you come on too strong on the other side, too forceful, too direct, too intentional, then that becomes problematic also. That can create its own kind of panic as well, especially in these young adult circles, that you're speaking about. And so then how do we define success then for guys? All right. So what does success look like with regards to dating? I mean, you listen to in preparation for today's podcast, I was looking online and just kind of surveying again kind of what is out there. And when it comes to dating advice for guys, I mean, it really all is just about how to get laid. Like it's like all of it is just here are the tips that you need to do to hook up with girls, hook up with as many girls as possible, et cetera, et cetera. I'm like, man, that's just, I mean, well, there it is. I mean, it's still present, obviously, and this is not the type of advice that we want to give. But in some hand, I hate to say this, in that paradigm, and I'm not agreeing with that paradigm, but in that paradigm, it's really easy to define what success is. Success is defined by how many girls you sleep with, and it's like, well, that's a very shallow, of course, sinful paradigm to measure with. But we can go to the other extreme, in a Catholic setting, which is that we only measure success based on finding a long-term relationship that ultimately ends into marriage. And anything short of that is considered a failure also. I would say that equally is problematic and puts too much pressure on ourselves. What's a little bit of a nuanced approach here? Okay. How can single guys who have been going on dates and struggling a little bit, how can they view what they're doing as still being something that's successful?
I think some question that can be very helpful with this is just asking, what did you learn from that experience?
Mm-hmm.
Because I think one of the challenges that we have in the modern Catholic dating world is we're told, and rightfully so, that dating is about marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And really, I think in that context, I talk about college conferences, and that is helpful when you're in a dating relationship and you're asking that question, how does this look long term? Is she a virtuous person? And would she be a good mother? Am I at that place as a man to where I'm growing and I can be a good husband and father and provide for the family? Those are very helpful in the context of a dating relationship. But prior to the dating relationship, if we are telling ourselves the first date's about, can I see myself marrying this person? Then it can cause a lot of pressure on that initial encounter where you're simply just getting to know one another. Mm-hmm. There is certainly an orientation of dating to marriage in the Catholic world, but I think that also it can be distracting from being able to actually see the person and you're looking at the goal of marriage and trying to get there. We put our hopes on, okay, that's success there. So going back to that question of success, what does success look like? To a certain extent, you want to be moving towards marriage. That's why a lot of times we're in the Catholic world asking somebody out. But to put all that pressure on ourselves of just asking a woman out is the success is only marriage here, then you could feel like a failure really quickly.
Oh, yeah.
And if you feel like a failure, you're less likely to ask the next woman out.
Correct.
And you're also less likely to ask somebody who you may have questions about. You're just like, I'm kind of hesitant in asking her out. And that could be a relationship that, whether it just develops into a friendship or develops into marriage, there could be beautiful things that come from just asking her out. Mm-hmm. So it can, by just putting marriage as this is success, can really put up a lot of obstacles for beautiful friendships, beautiful relationships to develop. So going back to that question of what did I learn from this interaction? Even going into, oh, I missed my opportunity. I was at this party. I missed my opportunity to ask this woman out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What did I learn from that? This isn't a failure. I might be beating myself, and I've had these situations come up. Like, shoot, I missed this. I totally would have been a great opportunity.
Was it right there, man. She was sitting over there.
Mm-hmm.
I could have swooped in, but I didn't.
Or I had this 30-minute conversation, and then somebody entered into our conversation, and I couldn't shake this other person.
Jerk, get out of here, man. What are you trying to do? Don't you see what's happening? Come on, man.
That's right. Yeah. So those have happened for me, but I know other men will be able to connect with those examples there.
Yeah, for sure.
But walking away from that experience is, well, I can't drag this out in just forever. I need to ask when I have that one-on-one time with her. That's a success of next time I'm going to do this. When I have that opportunity, I have to remind myself, you got to take the opportunity when you have it.
Yes.
And so that's one example of that's successful because I learned something.
I think that's great, because that's very practical. It's taking the small step. It's not letting perfect get in the way of progress. It's recognizing that we're going to make mistakes. There is an art to this. And I know even that word can kind of be a little loaded. We're not just talking about playing a game or being a pickup artist. But there is, in relationships, there is an art, like in therapy, it's a relationship, and there's an art, in terms of knowing how to navigate people and how to speak to them. And so again, going back to the sense of skills that you learn. And so if you can see yourself learning and growing from it, then I think that's fantastic. So hey everybody, this is Dr. Mario Sacasa here, just taking a quick break from my conversation with Chad to encourage you to check out Dating Well. Listen, if you are loving this conversation that we're having and loving this approach and this idea that all this is just skills that you can develop. If you don't look at it as just this great mystery and that dating is this great burden, but rather there's opportunities for growth that are available to you. If you want to know how to be able to grow in those skill set, you want to know how to be able to learn the questions that you should be asking, what to be reflecting on in the early stages of a relationship, how that's different than in the middle stages of a relationship and in the later parts of a relationship, then you want to check out Dating Well. 19 video lessons, super easy to use format available for you. The lessons range between 7 to 17 minutes in length so that you can take it and listen and take it to go. Have downloadable PDFs, so if you want to take those transcripts to prayer or reflect on them further or want to be able to just read and reference them on your own, all available to you. Go to faithandmarriage.org, click on the Dating Well tab, and you'll be able to get access to all the lessons available to you. One-time fee, have unlimited access to all the lessons, and to also be able to join the Dating Well community where we're having conversations such as these to encourage you to be able to know what you can do to improve your dating success. So let's get back into this conversation with Chad Etzel. Are there any other ways that we can measure success, even if, obviously we can measure success, and I want to let people know that ending in marriage, of course, obviously is the ultimate success here. And that is at some level what all of this is about, is to try to be able to find somebody. But I think what we're both communicating is that if we have too much pressure or too much expectation placed on us from the get-go, then we're going to miss an opportunity here. To be able to really develop something and recognize that a lot of this stuff starts small. And those small sparks, those small encounters and interactions in a college setting are easier to come by because of just the high level of time that is often shared together. But in a young adult setting, those small kind of spark moments are difficult. And so dating in that context is just really beginning something, trying to get to know somebody, trying to really even just begin the prospect of having conversations. And so even when it comes to dates, you can learn about somebody through one-on-one interactions in like obviously we're having a Zoom call right now, and you can do Zoom dates if you're doing something long distance or even with somebody going out for coffee. But at some point, it also needs to involve looking at her in the context of her family, of friendships, how she behaves in group settings, how she is in group settings, that you want to get a well-rounded picture of this person. Because when you ask somebody out from like a ministry setting, you see her across the room, hit it off, have a great conversation, you really don't know her. It's like she's a complete stranger, but she's attractive. She's attracted to you. You have a great conversation. Man, this is great. All right, let's go out. And so in those early kind of beginning phases of dating, you want to give ample opportunity to be able to not just have great conversation with her, but also to be able to see her in her context and see her in her element, so that you can see who she is and kind of begin to develop a more well-rounded picture. And that's harder in a young adult phase than it is in a college phase. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think another metric, I'm just kind of thinking about this, but within friendship is just asking, did I gain another friend? And it's not, you're not always going to be in touch with people and trying to maintain intentionally a new friendship that you went on a date with and it didn't end up progressing into a dating relationship.
Right.
But at least in terms of I go to a young adult event, see somebody who I took out on a date, and there is naturally going to be some sort of awkwardness there, but it's a matter of even checking in on, hey, how did you're dealing with this situation before? How did that develop? Or what are you doing? Just those things where you can have a continued conversation, because you can at least consider somebody a friend or an acquaintance. And within that, being able to see, did I see her as a person? Did I get an idea of who she was, rather than it being like John Paul II talks about in Love and Responsibility, idealism or idealization, where I'm trying to fit her into this mold of what I expect in a spouse. How did I see her as a person? Those are also other, I would say, measures of success that you could bring out of a first or second date or beyond.
Yeah, this is great. All right, so let's kind of get even more practical here. All right, in my episode with about single women, dating for single women, one of the things that was brought up was whether or not women should ask men out, or how they feel about that. Both of them kind of said that they felt uncomfortable with that because it begins from the get-go establishing a pattern that might not be healthy or functional or sustainable in the long run. And I know this phrase is common, particularly among single women, is that what women should do is to drop the hanky. So when a woman is interested in a guy, she's got to give kind of subtle cues or clues that she's interested in. So this is where the phrase "drop the hanky" comes from. It's kind of been explained to me in this historical context of like when you drop the hanky to get the guy to kind of talk to you as a real practical way of kind of having a conversation and showing your interest, right? And so this has become kind of a catch-all term for girl, kind of given the vibe, that she's interested. Now, I mean, not to be disparaging of us men, but sometimes we can be pretty obtuse, right? And so sometimes we can miss the cues, She could be dropping all the hankies in the world, but we're like, I ain't picking it up, I ain't seeing what you're laying down, I'm not feeling it, And I could be interested also, but maybe I'm just missing the cues. How do we help guys just to pick up on some of those cues? It's like, how do we know who the girls are that are actually dropping the hankies?
Yes, this is something that it's difficult because different women act in different ways.
Yes.
So different personalities may be more prone to, say, flirtatious behavior.
Right.
So it's difficult to just say blanket statement, hey, a girl's touching her hair a lot and therefore she likes you. There's some of that. And I do think that there's some truth to that, but it's a matter of, I think some women will be more prone. I like the episode with the women of the intentional single, where they talked about the men like the smile as the most important curve on the woman's body. And that I think is very helpful, just to encourage men to go out. So to go talk to her. But I think looking at her smile, engaging her in a conversation. And I think that maybe that's the initiative without the hanky, because that phrase I've heard and I'm familiar with, definitely, but I don't know if women are intentionally doing that unless they've taken a course with the intentional single. So it's but I can tell. I mean, I've interacted with enough women, gone out on enough dates with women to kind of pick up on those subtleties. And the smile is one of those things. Is if she's talking with me, is she making eye contact with me? Is she engaged in the conversation? Those are some of the signs that help with that. But also, is she trying to continue the conversation and ask me questions, or is she just kind of answering and looking for her escape? So I think it's a little bit more clear when you actually approach a woman, start a conversation with her, and not to get too in your head about this, but just see how is she receiving me and my presence here. Those are just some of the things that, as I think about my own life and people that I've worked with, a lot of times is she talking to me because she has to, or is she talking to me because she wants to?
Yes, exactly. And so, and you can pick up on that. I mean, you may not be able to pick up on that in a text message, but you absolutely can pick up on that in through nonverbals when you're actually engaging in conversation with somebody.
It's kind of a muscle that you build, especially as a man. I would think, just in my experience, because early on in my dating experience, I was told by women, "Oh, don't worry, don't overly worry about her reaction to whatever X, Y, or Z." And I think to a certain extent that's helpful, but you do become attuned to it through the going on dates and meeting women of who is more engaged than others. And so I think, just speaking to people who might be very early on in their dating experience, that's one of those things that simply just asking a woman out on a date without worrying about all this stuff just allows you to build that muscle.
Yeah, that again, we keep going back to muscle. We're building skills. None of this is meant to be intimidating. That's what we're trying to do and often the only ways you can build this muscle is through practicing it. That means you have to engage, you have to be having conversations. And I think it's important to know also here that when it comes to talking to girls, and a lot of guys feel very intimidated by talking to an attractive woman, if we're looking at it just as skill set, some of these skill sets are things that you can practice with other people. And so it could be something that maybe you start learning how to just talk to random strangers at the grocery store, even ones that you're not attracted to, or that you go up into a ministry setting and you don't just zero in on the attractive girl that you want to ask out, but you find yourself just being open to talking to whoever. And so the skills of being able to have just kind of conversation and dialogue are ones that you can practice in all sorts of settings. And not just placing pressure on yourself to have to zero in on and have to figure it out on the attractive girl that you've had your eye on for the last couple of weeks.
I think I would add into that, just looking at a young adult group or some sort of event. One of the things that my hope is, or what I do when I go to an event, is I want to meet at least one or two women that I haven't met before. And it's not necessarily I'm going to go meet women that I'm attracted to. That's not necessarily my goal. It's more, I just got to go interact and I got to go talk to somebody new. And I think that's helped me personally growing this muscle, that just being able to have a conversation and being able to connect on certain things, even if they're very simple and very cliche of, hey, where are you from? What do you do for work? Those become bridges to more of the deeper conversations. And the more you practice that, even with maybe it's women that you're not necessarily initially attracted to, you build that ability to have those conversations, and that can help you, or maybe they introduce you to a friend of theirs that maybe you are attracted to. Or just it opens up so many opportunities, not just focusing on, okay, I got to meet my future wife here at this event. And so I got to find the woman who's the most attractive to me.
Yes, right. Zero in, locked in, missile systems engaged. Let's go.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. That's a great experience, there. Okay. So let's maybe help guys a little bit here. All right. You find the girl, you kind of attracted to her, but the next phase is, well, I know I'm supposed to go talk to her, but what do I say? and that often comes up. What am I supposed to say? What's the opener? What's the line? Not just like a pickup line, but what's really the opener here? How do I break the ice? What are some suggestions that you have? I have some here that I'm gonna throw out to you also, but I'd like to hear your insights. Kind of what are some easy kind of low hanging fruit ways that you can kind of open a conversation with somebody that you're potentially interested in?
I would recommend just thinking about why you're at the event, and then even asking her why she's there. I'm just using young adult events as an example, or who do you know at this event who invited you to come to this. I think those are very, very helpful questions because they're open-ended to where you can talk about that friend of, oh, I know this person because of this and this, and that can open up different avenues for conversation. I think that is just a good generic way to start. Again, might be cliche, but you don't want to ask about, hey, what are your legitimate needs, or what are your deepest dreams?
No, you don't want to go over there.
No,
you don't want to do that. No, you definitely don't want to do that.
Right. And I do, I kind of like this. It just depends situationally of using this, but my friend, he likes to, when he's initially talking to people, he'll ask, what do you think is your greatest masterpiece? And it's like, what's the thing that you really have dedicated a lot to in your life and you're so proud of? And I think those sorts of things are helpful. May not be the very first question that you ask, but it allows you to start getting an idea of who the person is, what their interests are, what they really value in life.
Yeah. So how's this for you? All right. So here's a pickup line that I heard. Girl, until I met you, I thought there were only 5 glorious mysteries. You think that one would work?
Well, somebody should try it and let you.
Hey, listener, dear listener, someone give that one a shot and DM me. Let me know if that one worked for you. I'll give a shout out. It's actually from a priest who told me that one. So I'll give Father Matt Alexander a little shout out for that. So
maybe it's just me, and I have more introverted tendencies, but it's just a matter of like this whole idea of the pickup line.
Yes,
it's a little bit too much too soon.
Yeah. I agree. I'm being completely funny right now. I would never encourage anybody to go up to some random girl and drop that line as a way, but because it is a question of intentionality here. And I think this is where you have to be clear about what your intentions are for having the conversation. And so again, this is the line here, is that we want people to be intentional and not just throw spaghetti against the wall, but the intention can't just be, obviously hooking up. We've established that, but it can't just be also this incredible pressure to have to make sure that you find a life partner, you find your spouse kind of right out of the gates. The intentionality is, I'm learning. The intention is, I want to know how to be able to talk more. I want to be able to engage. I want to be able to build some relationships, and I want to be able to get to know somebody. That right there is sufficient. You can get to know her as she is. There's something about her that I find intriguing. There's something about her that I would like to know more about. I think that is a healthy intention to kind of begin these first kind of stages. And so some openers here, to kind of talk about. Yes, I think what you said is great. If you're already in a setting where there's some commonality, well, then that gives you something to kind of talk about. It's like, oh, well, what brought you here? That type of stuff. Like, who do you know here that invited you to be able to come to this event, et cetera? Those type of things are great kind of ways. I saw also, you talked about like the opinion piece. And so to be able to ask somebody, well, what is your favorite masterpiece? Get them to start opening up a little bit. It could also be that maybe if it is like a stranger or that you haven't met, then you could ask certain opinions about, even if you're, okay, here's an example, right? Let's say you're at the event and you're waiting in the line, and there's like 5 different types of sandwiches that are on the buffet, available. And if you happen to be standing next to a girl that you're kind of attracted to, and you want to strike up a conversation, you can ask, hey, what do you recommend? The tuna or the ham sandwich, and see what she says. She might be like, the tuna, whatever. And then you can banter a little bit. It could be like, the tuna stinks. No one likes tuna, whatever. You can, but at least you're asking her opinion on something kind of that allows her to begin some conversation. Those would be kind of more in the indirect realm of kind of openers. It's like, hey, like, let's get your opinion on this, or even in that setting, let's say you need something specific, and this would be kind of more of a functional kind of opener. It's like, well, I'm new to town, and I really am still trying to learn my way around. What are some restaurants that you recommend? Those type of things. To get some type of information, and that can kind of help kind of begin some conversation. How heavy do you think in terms of starting with a compliment, and just coming in and saying, wow, I appreciate your. I mean, I don't know what would be. You have to be specific with the compliment. It's not to be like, too generic, but something like, man, I really like your outfit that you're wearing tonight. I think the dress matching with the shoes, it's on point. And offering something specific like that. How again, not trying to be creepy, and not trying to be overly kind of heavy with the flirting, but at least starting with that as a compliment. What do you think about that as an opener for guys?
Sure. I think you're getting right onto it. You want to be specific enough, but you also don't want it to be sexualized.
Yep.
Just keeping that in mind. The compliments are good. I think you can think of it in a couple of ways. One, which is appearance, but also two, which is character.
Yes.
In personality. I think that those are, regardless of how you say them or what you say, you want it to be natural. Mm-hmm. So it could be picking her up. Hey, you look really great tonight. I like the outfit. And but then other things too, where, hey, I'm really impressed by your decision to do this in your masterpiece, or whatever what have you. And just being able to be something specific where it's not, it is personal to her in her experience, in her situation, I think is something that's important. I think that's kind of what I have on compliments. I don't know if you have any other thoughts there.
No, I think there's a fine line, obviously. You don't want to come across too strong and too forceful, but you want to be sincere. And if there's something that you genuinely like, or there's something unique that you can see that you're able to draw attention to, I think that does communicate a level of attention, that I think women respect also. That's not just a generic, hey girl, your hair looks great, whatever, or really love the makeup, or, but like that there's something very specific as to what it is that you find that you want to compliment her on. And I think that those things are important, because whether you come in with a direct, I'm interested, let's find some time to be together, to talk or whatever, or more indirect, again, you want to be able to, what you're trying to do here, back to the intention, is you're trying to begin to establish, is conversation even possible? And is there even some interest, right out of the gates, in terms of us even talking? So even if I'm in the line and I'm kind of chatting about like the types of sandwiches that are available, what do you like? What do you prefer here? You're already beginning to assess whether or not the conversation can kind of continue, or not. And those are going to be some factors, and she's doing the same thing, and so there's going to be some factors there that you're going to want to kind of pay attention to, because at the end of the day, you got to know what it is that you're looking for. In a long-term relationship, what are you looking for in a spouse? What are the things that you actually are interested in? And so you want to be able to kind of begin assessing, again, not putting all that pressure right out of the gates, but to at least begin kind of knowing, like, okay, this is kind of in the direction that I am looking for. So kind of giving some guys some tips there in terms of openers and how to be able to navigate that in a way that doesn't come across as being too heavy. Similar then, let's say, okay, you've connected, you find girl you like, and it's like, all right, we're going on the first date. What are topics that should be discussed? What would be the intention for the first date? What would be some no-fly zones that you would establish right out of the gates? What are your thoughts on that in terms of how can guys, and let me back up here a second. Why are we talking about this in this episode? Because as we've stated before, women are waiting for men to initiate. Women are waiting for men to be the ones that do ask them out. Women are waiting for men to be the ones that are beginning these conversations. So there is more pressure on us to have some comfort to be able to begin conversation, to have an opening line here, to be able to talk, but then also knowing what it is that we're expecting out of a first date too, since we're the ones that are going to be asking her out on that first date. So what are some expectations that we can have, and healthy kind of lines, when it comes to first dates?
In first dates, this is something that you learn, going back to that whole muscle analogy, but you learn and think about how deep should a first date go. And that'll depend on how well you know the woman, because it could be, if you're a college student listening to this and you've gotten a chance to get to know somebody, a first date, you're able to go deeper into certain topics. Whereas the first date, if you're getting to know somebody, then you've only had a previous 10-minute conversation or a couple of interactions with her, there's only a certain level of depth that you really can go. Mm-hmm. So I think that's an important thing, is just starting with that gauge of how well do I know her? Right. And then starting with, I think, and I can't tell you exactly how these all work, but what all the levels are, but Matthew Kelly has that 7 levels of intimacy. Mm-hmm. I think that's something where your listeners can go check out and just see, hey, these are certain things that we can talk about. In getting to that point of depth of how deep can I get, it just depends on how well do I know her. Mm-hmm. I think that the 4th level, if I remember correctly, is something like the dreams. 3rd level is opinions. You would want to, on a first date, if you don't know somebody very well, to have some discretion on what dreams, opinions, and then moving into those other levels of intimacy. But you can be asking these sorts of things because of I think it helps you get an idea of who this person is, rather than the first level, which is like cliche. Mm-hmm. It's just, how are you today? So I think operating in that first date, still having discretion is appropriate. Simply like asking, hey, what are the areas that you have dreamed of traveling to since you were a kid? That's something that gives you an idea of what is this person like? What is this person's preferences? And then you start
here they are. I just pulled them up. All right.
Yeah,
so we can get them all out here. This is really great. So sorry to interrupt you, but I want to make sure we get it. So cliches, the first level of intimacy is impersonal. Facts, saying something about yourself. 3, opinions, revealing more about yourself and offering the gift of acceptance to others. 4, hopes and dreams, setting aside instant gratification to build a future together. Feelings, emotional reactions, being vulnerable enough to tell how you feel. 6, faults, fears, and failures, exposing kind of our past experiences and hurts that we've had throughout our life. 7, legitimate needs. This becomes a dynamic collaboration. And so what you're saying is that in the first date, you don't want to just say a cliche, because that becomes too superficial. You want to get to some level of facts and be able to get to know each other in terms of your own histories and experiences, and maybe begin getting into some level of opinions about what you may have. But beyond that, we could start maybe talking a little bit about hopes and dreams, but more at a superficial level, and not at a kind of a depth level.
And I think it's fine if you're asking about dreams and you're coming from an individual, what are your dreams, mm-hmm. as opposed to what are our dreams? Because that'll freak a woman out if you start talking about us on a first date our dreams together. Yeah. So that I think is just an important thing to keep in mind. And then as you get higher, you can probably dip into those areas, but still, again, just with discretion and with patience, because you don't want to be talking about your wounds if you hardly know somebody, because they don't need you don't need to be sharing your wounds. You don't need a girlfriend there. You need a counselor there.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, that's it. But that's important, because even when it comes to like opinions, similarly, you may want to share certain opinions, but you may not be ready to reveal everything about whatever political leaning that you have, and all of that. And and that can be a place where this is important, because sometimes guys, we want to talk more about logic, and we want to get into debates. Like, with guys, we love getting into debates about silly things like, who's going to win the NBA championship this year, you know what I mean? And who's the greatest player of all time, or, all this other stuff that we can kind of get into. we don't want to lock horns with a girl, on the first date. Like and she might not even be interested, in that. Now, again, a good, healthy conversation might involve a little sparring. Okay. But you have to kind of know when it's becoming too much.
I think what's something I'll interject on there
please.
on the opinion is, again, this is all discretion. It all depends on the person, but we hear that cliche of nice guys finish last. And part of that, I think, has to do with handling conflict. The agreeable guy, there's nothing may not be as exciting there, but what I've learned is I was taking a little bit of a course on book writing. And one of the things that the authors do to keep a plot interesting is they create conflict.
Yeah.
And that allows the plot to stay interesting as opposed to characters just kind of agreeing and just doing their stuff, because conflict allows for something to progress because you have something to overcome. I don't mean to say, you need to manufacture conflict here, but there's something about that, I think, on a first date or in a relationship, especially definitely more in a healthy sense of having a disagreement. So where those opinions are, not to where it's the really serious things. I mean, but some things that might be okay. So your favorite character in the Barbie movie was whoever. Okay,
this is
maybe
great.
not the best example, but
no, I'm
but
with you.
like,
I'm following you. Go. I'm with you.
So if you connect on something of like, hey, who's your favorite Disney princess? Or mine is this.
You'd be like,
you
what?
have
Why?
a sort of,
come on, Ariel would be the best. Whatever. And then that becomes a little healthy conflict in terms of the discussion there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even like you're you go get coffee and you're like, oh, you're going to get a super frappe latte chino, whatever. It's like, oh, well, I'm just a black coffee guy, or whatever it is. It's got to be sincere, obviously. We're not saying, create it just for its own sake. But don't be afraid to have to be so overly agreeable that you're like, you have to order the exact same thing she orders. You have to like all the exact same stuff that she likes, because that isn't even sincere. That's not you. And so you're not going to even give her an opportunity to be able to see you as you are if you're so overly agreeable with everything that she's doing. That's what you're saying, right?
Yes, exactly. And there was something I heard, I think Dave Ramsey, I don't know where he got it from, but he said, if there are two of the same people in a relationship, one of you is unnecessary. We're just naturally different people, and it's okay to have conflicts, especially early on, having disagreements on smaller things, less high stake things. And the bigger disagreements are not insurmountable as a relationship progresses, but there's something that may take more conversations to have, but may not be as appropriate of like how many kids I want to have on a first date. You shouldn't be talking about those sorts of things.
That's right. And so again, this is back to the skill, kind of the art of it is knowing, kind of what appropriate boundaries are, knowing how much needs to be shared with somebody without becoming too heavy, without becoming too much, because you're walking away from an experience. The data primarily that you're going to be acquiring is going to be at an emotional level. It's like, did you have a good time? Was it awkward? Did you find a sense of connection? Was conversation easy? Those aren't just logical statements. Those are going to be more at an emotional level, and she's going to be feeling the same thing too. And so recognizing that even the vehicle, the data, the points that you talk about are just that. They're just vehicles. Really at the end of the day, what you're trying to assess is what type of experience are we having together? Can we have a good time? Do I feel safe enough, with her? Is there something good that I recognize in her? Is there a good nature that's there? Is there a potential for more? Is there connection? Is there, or does it just always feel awkward? That even guys, we're going to be assessing that at an emotional level, in not just at a logical kind of data points, kind of level. So, all right. Well, Chad, this has been wonderful. I guess just before we kind of wrap this up, if you allow me just a few more minutes here of your time, when it comes to guys who just have that, I think you've coined this, the perpetual single, guys who really do just struggle, and just find themselves being single a lot longer than they would want. What's a word of encouragement that you could offer to them? And what's a first step that you would offer for them to be able to kind of overcome whatever challenges that they may be experiencing?
I think the first step is really just examining our desires, asking that what's the story I'm telling myself that is
Mhm.
triggering what I'm feeling. And it could be like a loneliness or this longing, however you want to label the emotion or the feeling. And what's the story that's contributing to that? That starts there, and then praying through that as well. Because the more we grow in the awareness of what's going on internally to us, the the more that we can take steps to change it. So from there, understanding what's that story, sometimes we just need to be able to speak it out, and we realize, hey, this isn't actually true. So going back to what I mentioned earlier about the limiting beliefs, oh, there must be something wrong with me. If that's a story that I'm continuing to tell myself, then I can counteract that through prayer, through scripture, and in remembering I'm a beloved son of God. And that there's also more work that we can do there, but I found it helpful creating a personal mission statement. This is something that I do with my clients in coaching, is helping them identify what is that personal mission statement. This is something that I don't know if you've done with couples in therapy, but the creating a mission statement together, you have something that your marriage is about and you can move towards. But
Mhm.
I think as singles, it's all right, what is my life really about? What is God calling me to today? If I'm nailing this mission, then it doesn't matter whether I get in this relationship tomorrow or not, because I'm taking steps towards that mission. So I
Mhm.
think those are some of the strategies that I do through coaching. And then I guess even more practical is, am I meeting people? Am I going out
Mhm.
developing both
Right.
friendships with men, but also friendships with women as well? Because good things happen when you are actually actively developing real friendships.
Yeah. Now, how do you do that? How do you feel, I guess, in that regard? As you said, you have a more introverted temperament. Uh, so, how do you navigate that in terms of, as an introvert, walking into a new room, seeing people? The stereotype obviously is the extroverts are like, yeah, the life of the party, able to whatever. But how does that feel for you as an introvert?
It's definitely a challenge. It feels like, oh, how would I explain this? Just, oh man, what are these people going to think about me? And there's kind of this either embarrassment, maybe that's not quite the right word, but exposure or something. But the I think just stepping out there, many people are probably feeling the same way. And what I'm looking for a lot of the time is, and I think this can be a helpful tip for people, is the looking for odd number of people as they're standing together. Because if there's two people, they're going to be engaged in a conversation. You might be interrupting. Three people, two people are probably talking to each other, the other is listening. So you can go approach
Hmm.
that particular group and start a conversation with the person who's not being talked to. But
Hmm.
also, I think just reframing how we look at who we are as introverts and extroverts is, as introverts, one of the advantages is that we are deep and thoughtful people.
Hmm.
And we can use that deep thoughtfulness to be able to engage people in a conversation. Because introverts, it's not that we don't want to talk to people, it's that we want to just talk to one person at a time, or
Right.
maybe just a smaller group. And
Right.
that's the areas where we thrive.
Yeah.
So it's
That's
it's really that reframing. How do I look at this? Of, well, the first step is just finding somebody to talk to. And once I'm talking to that person, then I can just really invest myself in a deep budding friendship.
yeah. That's fantastic. Well, that's really great, because I imagine a number of folks who are listening are introverts and do struggle, with some of these things, and maybe they feel, as we've talked about, that the limiting belief is that the reason that they're not dating is because of their introversion, and so we just want, again, the show's about hope, obviously, and that's what we're trying to do, is to give people hope. So, Chad, this has been a wonderful conversation. If people have been listening and are interested in listening to your podcast or learning more about the services you provide, what's the best way for folks to be able to do that?
A couple of ways on social media. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram, Chad_Etzel. That's Etzel. And then LinkedIn is Chad-Etzel. And you can also find me through my podcast, Catholic Single and Flourishing. Most podcast platforms have that. And then also I have a website. It's csf.org. That's Catholic Single and Flourishing, csfcoaching.com. If you want to learn more about some of my coaching offerings, I have a personal strategy session, 90 minutes. It's a very just simple evaluation of where you're at in creating action items and steps forward. And then I have a more in-depth coaching program, which is done over the course of 10 to 12 weeks, more specifically directed towards you and your situation when it comes to your single life, when it comes to your dating, on personal finance, mindset, and dating strategy. And so those are the offerings that I have and the way you can continue to have conversations with me.
Sounds great. We'll put links to those in the show notes. And Chad, final question I ask all my first-time guests: what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is certainly my faith in Jesus Christ and being able to pray. And I think that, as cliche as that might sound, specifically what it means to me is I have these difficult experiences when it comes to dating and or anything else in life, but being able to go and unpack it in prayer. And as this has come up as a theme in this episode, is what's the story I'm telling myself about this, whether it's the situation itself or about me personally. And then what does God want to say to me as well? That is ultimately coming out of prayer sessions. It may be resolved in that time of prayer, but it's often resolved eventually of God has some sort of message for me that he wants to speak to me. And that's a message that is always uplifting and always hopeful.
Amen. Amen. Well, praise the Lord for all of that. Chad, thanks so much, man, for joining me on the show. God bless you and all the good work that you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Mario.
All right, everybody. Well, that does it for my conversation with Chad. I pray that you've enjoyed it. Men, I hope that it's given you something to think about, and not just something to think about, but some tools to use. You know, guys, we like to be able to have tools. We want to be able to develop skills. We want to be able to know what are the things that we're supposed to do to improve our chances and to make us a little bit more confident when asking girls out, how to have those conversations, what is healthy expectation for first dates. If any of this resonated with you, then please listen to this episode again. And if you have a buddy who is in need of a little bit of encouragement or a little bit of guidance from a healthy source, then please pass along this episode. Or if you have any comments or questions, then please check me out on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Dr. Mario Sacasa on all of those platforms. Have any comments or questions you want to offer? I welcome them. I love being able to have conversations and dialoguing with my listeners. And so God bless you all, and we'll catch you in the next one real soon. Hope you're well.